Here are your answers to 8 through 14. Check and see how you did, and then go through the video and watch me working out the problems you missed. This video is all about the Pythagorean Theorem. So if you'll recall, the Pythagorean Theorem says that a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where a and b are the legs of a right triangle and c is the hypotenuse. Now this first question here, number 8, wants us basically to interpret the Pythagorean Theorem. So it says, what of the following statement is true? So it says the sum, we're adding, and it says the sum of the perimeters of A and B. So are we finding the perimeter of these squares here and setting them and adding them and setting them equal to each other? No. If you'll recall, we did a little hands-on thing, a little puzzle, where we did the areas, right? This is A squared. This is B squared. This is C squared. So it's the sum of the areas of A and B. We found the areas of the squares, we added them up, and that equaled the area of C. Okay? All right, now let's use that to find some unknown sides. Here, they told us it's a right triangle, so we know that's a right angle. That means this is our hypotenuse. Remember, the right angle box points to the hypotenuse. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Remember, a and b do not matter. Which one's which? So 6 squared plus 8 squared equals c squared. I get 36 plus 64. That's 100 equals c squared, but I want c. Remember, your last thing is to take the square root. So we want the square root of 100. If c squared is 100, then c is 10, because 10 times 10 is 100. So it is 10 inches. That's B. Number 10 says, which of the following sets of numbers could represent the length of a side of a right triangle? So what you do is you take the 3 sides they give you and you decide which one would be C. The hypotenuse is always the longest side. So 13 would have to be C because it's the longest side. So we're going to test, does 5 squared plus 12 squared, does it equal 13 squared? We get 25 plus 144. We want to know, does that equal 13 squared, which is 169? And we got lucky. It worked on the first time. 5, 12, 13 are the sides of a right triangle. Okay? Now, word problems. Chandler is having a rectangular swimming pool installed in her backyard. So what do you need to draw? You need to draw a rectangle. The dimensions of the pool are 15 feet by 20 feet. And it says, what is the length of the diagonal? Well, if it's a rectangular pool, then that's a right angle. That makes this a right triangle. So we're going to do a squared plus b squared equals c squared. 15 squared plus 20 squared equals c squared. 15 squared is 225. 20 squared is 400. That gives us what? 625 is c squared. You take the square root and you get 25. So the diagonal of that pool is going to be 25 feet. Now for this next problem, Jack placed a ladder against the side of his house. So remember what this looks like. Here's his house. Here's the ladder. He's leaning a ladder up against the house. Hopefully that house makes a right angle with the ground. It says the ladder is 25 feet long. And he placed the top of the ladder, that's up here, 20 feet from the base of the house. How far is the base of the ladder from the base of the house? Now, is that a leg or hypotenuse? That is a hypotenuse. So let's let that be A. Remember, it really doesn't matter if it is A, B, if it's A or B, okay? The legs don't matter. So a squared plus 20 squared equals 25 squared. That's a squared plus 400 equals 625. We're going to subtract 400 from both sides. These numbers should look familiar to you since we just dealt with them. 625 minus 400 is 225. We take the square root, and we get A is 15 feet. Pythagorean theorem and distance. Remember, when I've got 2 points on a coordinate plane, I can find the distance between P and Q. And how do I do that? I draw a right triangle. So we're going to draw this right triangle in, and we count the sides. This side, 1, 2, 3, has length 3. This side is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my two sides are 3 and 5, and the distance I want to find is the hypotenuse. So I set up. Three squared plus 5 squared equals c squared. 25 plus 9 is what? 34 equals c squared. Now typically we would plug this in the calculator and find a decimal, but if you look over here, they didn't give us decimals. If c squared is 34, then c is the square root of 34. Since this didn't go nicely, they just left it as a square root. So the square root of 34 miles is the distance between P and Q. All right, look at 14. Using the measurements given in the figure below, determine the length of segment AC. Now this is one of those that you have to sort of use your imagination a little bit. This is a string going from the top corner of the box down to the bottom, and this is one that we use the Pythagorean theorem twice. Okay, so watch what happens here. We're going to draw across the bottom of the box, and it's going to be really hard to do here on that side. Now, first of all, do you see this right triangle? The side of the box, the diagonal of the bottom, and the diagonal through the box. That's a right triangle, okay? I know this one back here. If this is 3, this one back here is also 3. But I don't know this across the bottom. So I have to use this right triangle, this funky right triangle right here, okay? What does this equal? Well, do you notice this and this and this all have to be the same thing? So if this is 5, this is 5 because they're all rectangles, so this is 5. So down here is 5. Now, what is this side over here? It's got to equal that over here because that bottom's a rectangle, right? So if this is 2, this other one's 2. So my first little set, let's let, let's let it be x to begin with. I'm going to say 2 squared plus 5 squared is x squared. So that's 4 plus 25 is x squared. That's 29. Now they're not using, look at your answers, they're not using decimals. So if x squared is 29, then x is just the square root of 29. So that down there is the square root of 29. So now this right here through the box is the hypotenuse of the back edge and across the bottom. So I'm going to say 3 squared plus the square root of 29 squared equals c squared. That's where I'm finally going to get this through the middle. So 3 squared is 9. What's the square root of 29 squared? Well, when I square a square root, I get whatever's inside. So the square root of 29 squared is 29. Basically, the square root and the square cancel each other out. That equals c squared. What is that? That is 38 equals c squared. This is not a perfect square, so they leave it. They just take the square root. Square root of 38, that's d.